The cruelest traps were not built in dark alleys or behind locked doors. Sometimes they were wrapped in candlelight, silk tablecloths, soft music, and smiling faces pretending to celebrate kindness. Carolyn Abernathy did not know that when she stepped out of the Blacktown car in front of the glowing charity hall, every camera inside was already waiting for her. She did not know her own sister had turned her pain into entertainment. She only knew that, for the first time in years, Cleo had invited her somewhere beautiful, somewhere important. Somewhere that seemed to say maybe tonight would be different. The venue rose above the city like a palace made of glass and gold. Warm light poured through the tall windows, spilling over the red carpet and catching the silver beads sewn into the gowns of the women walking ahead of her. Carolyn stood near the curb for one quiet second, her fingers tight around the small black clutch she had borrowed from a co-worker. She was 31 years old, a senior accountant at a private investment firm, and she had spent most of her life trying not to take up more space than people allowed her. At a size 22, she had learned how to enter rooms carefully. She knew how to pull her shoulders inward, how to laugh softly when someone made a joke at her expense, how to pretend she did not notice when strangers looked at her body before they looked at her face. But tonight she had tried. She had really tried. Her dress was dark blue, simple and elegant, with long sleeves and a soft waist that flowed over her stumps instead of squeezing it. She had spent almost an hour standing in front of her mirror, arguing with herself. One voice told her she looked pretty. Another voice, louder and older, sounded like every relative, every mean girl, every boyfriend who never wanted to be seen with her in public. That voice told her Cleo would regret inviting her the moment she saw her. It told her everyone inside would wonder why a woman like Carolyn had come to an event filled with influencers, models, donors, and beautiful people who knew exactly how to stand under a camera flash. Still, Carolyn had come. Because Cleo was her sister. Because the invitations had said the dinner was for body positivity and self-worth. Because Cleo had called her 3 nights ago with a soft voice that sounded almost real and said, "Carolyn, I want you there, I mean it. You belong in that room too." Carolyn had held the phone for a long time after that call ended, staring at the wall of her small apartment while hope moved through her like something fragile waking up after a long sleep. Cleo had not always been cruel. When they were little, before followers, before brand deals, before Cleo learned that beauty could be turned into money, she used to crawl into Carolyn's bed during thunderstorms. She used to hold Carolyn's hand at school. She used to say they were a team. Then Cleo grew tall and thin and bright, with perfect cheekbones and a smile that made strangers soften. Carolyn grew quiet, round, careful, and useful. Cleo became the girl everyone watched. Carolyn became the sister people forgot until they needed tax forms, budgeting help, or someone to clean up a financial mess. The doorman opened the glass door for her, and a wave of warmth swept over her face. Inside, the charity hall shimmered with expensive flowers, crystal chandeliers, and soft pink lighting that made everything look dreamlike. A large banner near the entryway read, "Love Everybody," in looping gold letters. Photographers stood near a wall covered in roses, calling out names as guests posed with their hands on their hips and their faces tilted toward the light. Carolyn saw women smiling beside signs about confidence while assistants adjusted the angles of their bodies for better photos. For a moment, her stomach tightened. Then she saw Cleo. Her sister stood at the center of the room in a white satin gown that looked almost bridal, surrounded by people with phones raised and smiles ready. Cleo was glowing, beautiful in the way that made people turn without meaning to. Her hair fell in soft waves over one shoulder, and diamonds flashed at her ears when she moved. Beside her stood her fiancé, Preston Vale, tall and polished, with a watch too expensive for his calm smile and eyes that never stayed on one person for long. Carolyn had met him only twice. Both times he had kissed Cleo's cheek, while looking past Carolyn like she was furniture. Cleo spotted Carolyn and spread her arms wide. "There she is," Cleo called, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "My beautiful sister." Carolyn froze for half a breath. The word beautiful landed strangely inside her, like a language she understood but had never heard spoken to her. Cleo walked over and hugged her carefully, not too tight the way women hugged when they were thinking about makeup and camera angles. Still, Carolyn let herself enjoy it. She let herself believe in it. "You look lovely," Cleo said, pulling back and touching Carolyn's sleeve. "Really, I'm so glad you came." "Thank you for inviting me," Carolyn said. Her voice came out softer than she wanted. "This place is amazing." Cleo's smile widened. "Tonight is going to be unforgettable." Something in the way she said it made Carolyn glance at her, but Cleo was already turning toward a young woman holding a phone on a stabilizer. "Mira, get a few shots of us later. I want the sister moment for the recap." Carolyn told herself not to overthink it. Cleo lived online, everything was content. That did not mean tonight was bad. It just meant Cleo was Cleo. A waiter passed with champagne, and Carolyn took a glass mostly to give her hands something to do. Cleo guided her deeper into the hall, introducing her to people with polished names and quick smiles. "This is my sister, Carolyn. She's an accountant. Very smart. So good with numbers." The introductions were kind on the surface, but each one made Carolyn feel smaller. Not because of the words, but because of the pauses after them. People waited for more, as if being an accountant was not enough to justify her presence in a room where everyone else had a brand, a foundation, a podcast, or a luxury skincare line. Carolyn tried to smile anyway. At the far end of the hall, beyond the charity displays and auction tables, a balcony overlooked the city. Standing there, half hidden in shadow, was a man Carolyn had never seen before, but somehow recognized as dangerous before anyone told her his name. He wore a black suit with no tie, clean and simple, but nothing about him felt simple. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and still in a way that made the moving room seem nervous around him. His dark hair was combed back from a sharp face, and his eyes moved slowly over the crowd, missing nothing. Two men stood several feet behind him, dressed like guests but watching like guards. Carolyn looked away quickly when his gaze passed near her. Her heart gave one strange beat. Cleo noticed. "Oh," Cleo said lightly, following her eyes. "That's Leonardo Moretti." Carolyn almost dropped her glass. Everyone in the city knew the Moretti name. They said it in lowered voices, half as gossip and half as warning. Leonardo Moretti owned restaurants, hotels, shipping companies, construction firms, and, if the rumors were true, half the secrets powerful men prayed would never be spoken aloud. He was the kind of man who did not need to raise his voice, because the room lowered itself for him. "What is he doing here?" Carolyn whispered. Cleo's smile tightened for just a second. "The venue belongs to one of his companies. He supports charities when it suits him." Preston appeared beside Cleo then, his hand sliding around her waist. Leo likes to keep an eye on things he owns. The way Preston said Leo was too familiar but not warm. Carolyn noticed his jaw tense when Leonardo's name left his mouth. She noticed Cleo's fingers press into Preston's sleeve, a small warning. Numbers had trained Carolyn to see patterns, and life had trained her to see discomfort. Something about the two of them changed whenever the man on the balcony was mentioned. Before she could think more about it, Cleo leaned close and lowered her voice. "I have someone I want you to meet." Carolyn's nerves returned so quickly she almost laughed. "Cleo, no, please don't. Relax," Cleo said, smiling as if Carolyn were being adorable. "He asked about you." That made no sense. No handsome stranger at a charity dinner asked about Carolyn. Men did not spot her across crowded rooms and wonder who she was. Men asked her to take group photos or watch purses or split checks cause she was good at math. But Cleo was already waving someone over. The man who approached looked like he had stepped out of one of Cleo's sponsored vacation posts. His name was Julian Cross. He had golden brown hair, a smooth smile, and the relaxed confidence of someone who had never once wondered if he deserved to be in a beautiful room. He wore a velvet jacket and spoke to Carolyn like she was the only person standing there. "So you're Carolyn," he said, taking her hand. "Cleo has been hiding you." Carolyn gave a nervous laugh. "I don't think anyone could hide me very easily." The old self-defense joke slipped out before she could stop it. Usually, people laughed too loudly at lines like that, relieved she had insulted herself first so they did not have to. but Julian only tilted his head. "I think you underestimate how striking you are." Carolyn's face warmed. She looked down, then hated herself for looking down. Cleo made a soft sound beside her, almost like delight. "I'll leave you two to talk," Cleo said. "Carolyn, enjoy yourself tonight." Julian stayed beside her through the first round of speeches. He asked about her work. He listened when she explained audits and non-profit reporting. He laughed when she made a dry comment about how every charity gala seemed to spend more on flowers than actual charity. He offered to bring her sparkling water when she said champagne made her sleepy. He stood close enough that other women began to glance over with curiosity. For the first time that evening, Carolyn felt the tightness in her chest loosen. Maybe Cleo had meant it. Maybe this was her way of making up for years of distance. Maybe Julian was simply kind. Maybe the night did not have to end with Carolyn crying in a bathroom stall, telling herself she should have stayed home. Across the room, Cleo stood near the Livestream station, smiling at her phone as thousands of comments raced upward on the screen. The charity dinner was being broadcast to her followers, and the feed was titled The Confidence Experiment. Carolyn had not seen the title. She had not seen the hidden camera tucked into the floral centerpiece near her table. She did not know that Julian had a small microphone clipped inside his jacket. She did not know that Cleo had promised her audience a powerful lesson about false confidence, beauty standards, and what happened when someone who had been invisible started believing too much in herself. Leonardo Moretti knew. From the balcony, Leo watched the room with cold patience. He had not planned to stay longer than 10 minutes. Charity dinners bored him. Influencers bored him more. They filled his halls with fake laughter, free champagne, and empty words about kindness while treating waiters like ghosts. But then he had seen the woman in the blue dress enter alone, holding her clutch like it was armor. He had seen the way she paused before stepping fully inside, as if she had to ask the room for permission to exist. He had seen Cleo Abernathy's smile, bright and sharp as broken glass. And because Leonardo Moretti had survived this long by understanding traps before they closed, he stayed. His head of security, Matteo, leaned near him and spoke quietly. "The live stream numbers are high. Almost 2 million watching across platforms." Leo did not look away from Carolyn. "What is the title?" Matteo checked the tablet in his hand. His expression hardened. "The Confidence Experiment." Leo's eyes narrowed. Downstairs, dinner began. Carolyn sat at Cleo's table, placed between Julian and an empty chair that no one explained. Cleo welcomed everyone with tears in her eyes and spoke about loving every version of yourself. She talked about her journey, her struggles, her dream of creating a world where women did not have to shrink to be accepted. The guests applauded. Carolyn clapped too, though something heavy had settled in her stomach. Cleo's speech was beautiful. That was the problem. Cleo always knew how to make beautiful things out of pain, especially when the pain belonged to someone else. Then Cleo turned toward Carolyn, and tonight, Cleo said into the microphone, "I want to honor someone very special. My sister Carolyn." A spotlight shifted. Carolyn blinked as bright light fell across her face and shoulders. Conversations faded. Phones rose around the room like small glowing eyes. Her heart started beating too fast. Cleo smiled at her from the stage. Carolyn has spent years struggling with confidence. Like many women, she has felt overlooked, unwanted, and unsure of herself. Tonight we wanted to show her that confidence is beautiful. But we also wanted to ask an honest question. What happens when confidence becomes fantasy? A strange silence moved through the room. Carolyn's fingers tightened around her napkin. "Cleo?" she whispered. Though her sister was too far away to hear, Julian shifted beside her. His smile changed. It became thinner, colder, practiced. A camera moved closer. Cleo kept speaking. "Sometimes people tell us to believe we are desired, admired, and powerful. But is that always empowering, or can it become dangerous when we ignore reality?" A few guests laughed nervously. Others looked down at their phones. Carolyn felt the blood drain from her face. Julian stood, her stomach turned. He looked down at her with an expression so different from the warm one he had worn all night that Carolyn barely recognized him. "Carolyn," he said, his voice carrying through the microphone hidden on him. "I need to be honest. This was part of the event." The room became very still. "What?" Carolyn said. The word was barely air. Julian glanced toward Cleo, then back at Carolyn. "I was asked to show you attention tonight, to make a point about how easy it is for people to mistake politeness for attraction." Soft laughter broke from somewhere near the back of the room. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." Another person's phone camera zoomed in. Carolyn could not move. Julian's face softened in fake sympathy, which somehow hurt worse than cruelty. "You seem like a nice person. But you had to know someone like me was not actually interested." The laughter grew, not loud at first, just scattered, sharp, and ugly enough to cut. Carolyn looked at Cleo. Her sister stood on the stage with tears shining in her eyes, but they were not tears of regret. They were performance tears. They were perfect for the camera. "This is not meant to shame her," Cleo said quickly, turning back toward the live stream. "This is meant to start a conversation about self-awareness, online positivity, and the difference between confidence and delusion." The word delusion landed like a slap. Carolyn stood too quickly, her chair scraping against the floor. The sound echoed through the hall. Her hands were shaking so badly she could not pick up her clutch. Julian stepped back like he was afraid she might touch him. Cleo's guests watched her with wide eyes and hungry faces, pretending to be shocked while making sure their phones kept recording. For a few seconds, Carolyn was no longer 31. She was 13 again, standing in a school hallway while boys laughed at a fake love note. She was 17, listening to relatives tell Cleo she had gotten all the good genes. She was 25, smiling through a family dinner while an aunt asked if she had considered surgery. She was every age she had ever been when someone made her body into a public lesson. Only this time millions were watching. "I trusted you," Carolyn said, staring at her sister. Cleo's smile trembled, but she did not step down from the stage. "Carolyn, this is bigger than us. You'll understand when you see how many women this helps." Carolyn let out a small sound, not quite a laugh and not quite a sob. "Helps?" The cameras moved closer. Then the lights flickered. Not fully. Just once, soft and sudden, enough to make the whole hall pause. The live stream screens at the side of the room went black. A murmur spread through the guests. Cleo turned sharply toward her production team. "What happened?" The music stopped. From the balcony came a slow, measured sound. One pair of hands clapping, everyone looked up. Leonardo Moretti stood at the railing, his face unreadable, his dark eyes fixed not on Cleo, not on Julian, not on the cameras, but on Carolyn. He descended the stairs without hurry. His men followed at a distance, silent and watchful. Cleo's production assistant whispered frantically into a headset, but no feed returned. Phones still recorded, but even those hands began to lower. Leo reached the main floor and walked straight to Carolyn. Julian moved as if to step away from him, but Matteo appeared behind him and placed one calm hand on his shoulder. Julian went pale. Cleo came down from the stage, her smile breaking at the edges. "Mr. Moretti, I'm sorry if there was a technical issue. We can explain." Leo did not look at her. He stopped in front of Carolyn, close enough that she could see the faint scar near his jaw and the controlled anger in his eyes. His voice, when he spoke, was quiet. "Are you all right?" It was such a simple question. No one had asked it. Not Cleo, not Julian, not a single person in the room. The kindness of it almost broke her. Carolyn swallowed hard. "No." Leo nodded once, as if that answer had sealed something. Then he turned to the room. "This event is over," he said. Cleo's face went white. "You can't just end my gala." Leo finally looked at her, and the soft fear in the room became something sharper. "I own the building. I own the servers carrying your broadcast. I own the security system, the exits, the donor registry, and the company that processed every sponsorship payment attached to this event. So yes, Miss Abernathy, I can end your gala." No one moved. Leo's gaze swept over the guests, the influencers, the donors, and the silent cowards with their phones half raised. "Anyone who recorded her pain for entertainment will delete it before leaving this room. Anyone who uploads it will answer to me." A man near the bar quickly lowered his phone. Cleo's voice shook. "This is awareness." "No," Leo said. "This is cruelty wearing a pretty dress." Carolyn stared at him, stunned, humiliated, and strangely steady for the first time all night. Something about his presence made the room feel less endless. The shame was still there, hot and heavy, but it no longer belonged only to her. It had started to turn outward toward the people who created it. Leo looked back at her. His voice softened. "You do not have to stay here." Carolyn glanced at Cleo. Her sister's face was twisted between panic and fury, but underneath both was something uglier. Fear. Not fear for Carolyn. Fear of losing control of the story. Carolyn bent down and picked up her clutch. Her hands were still trembling, but she did not hide them. When she straightened, Leo offered his arm. For one long second, she hesitated. She knew what people said about him. She knew the Moretti name was not safety in any normal sense. But nothing about this night had been normal. The people who spoke the softest words had been the cruelest. The man everyone feared was the only one who had asked if she was all right. So Carolyn placed her hand on his arm. Leo led her through the silent crowd. No one laughed now. No one whispered loudly enough for her to hear. They simply watched as the woman they had mocked walked beside the most dangerous man in the city, her blue dress catching the gold light. Her chin lifted, though her heart was still breaking. At the door, Cleo called after her, desperate and sharp. "Carolyn, don't do this. You're making a mistake." Carolyn stopped. For years, she would have turned around. She would have apologized. She would have protected Cleo from the consequences of Cleo's own choices. But tonight, something inside her had finally gone quiet. Not dead, not broken. Quiet in the way a storm becomes quiet before it changes direction. She looked back at her sister. "No," Carolyn said softly. "For once I'm not." Then she walked out with Leonardo Moretti into the cold city night, leaving the ruined charity hall behind her, unaware that the humiliation Cleo had planned as Carolyn's ending had just become the first page of her rise. The cold city night wrapped around Carolyn like a warning, sharp against her cheeks and quiet enough to make the shame inside her feel louder. Behind her, the charity hall still glowed through its tall glass doors, but the warmth inside no longer looked beautiful. It looked false. It looked like a painted stage where people had smiled while waiting to watch her break. Carolyn walked beside Leonardo Moretti without knowing where they were going, only knowing that every step away from Cleo felt like stepping out of a room where she had been holding her breath for years. A black car waited at the curb, silent and polished beneath the streetlights. One of Leo's men opened the back door before they reached it, but Leo did not rush her inside. He paused beside her on the sidewalk, still offering his arm, letting her choose whether to let go. That small pause unsettled her more than any command could have. Men like Leonardo Moretti were supposed to take. They were supposed to decide, order, and move the world with a glance. But he stood there in the cold, watching her with dark, patient eyes, as if her choice mattered. Carolyn's fingers slipped from his sleeve. She looked down at her hand and saw it trembling. "I don't know what happens now," she whispered. Leo's face did not soften much, but something in his voice did. "Now you breathe." The answer was so simple that her eyes burned again. She hated that she was still close to crying. She hated that Cleo had done this to her in a room full of people. And she hated even more that part of her still wanted to understand why. She wanted there to be some explanation that made her sister less cruel. Some hidden reason, some mistake. Some moment where Cleo would run outside, grab her hands, and say she had gone too far. But the glass doors behind them stayed closed. Carolyn slid into the car and Leo sat beside her. The door shut with a heavy, final sound, sealing out the cold and the city noise. Inside, the car smelled faintly of leather and rain. The windows were dark enough that no one outside could see in, but Carolyn could still see the building as they pulled away. Her reflection stared back at her from the glass. Blue dress, round face, tear-bright eyes. A woman who had been made into a lesson. Leo did not touch her. He did not crowd her. He sat close but still, his hands resting calmly on his knees while the city passed around them in long ribbons of light. After several blocks, Carolyn finally spoke. How many people were watching? Leo turned his head slightly. Enough. She closed her eyes. That means millions. Yes. The honesty hurt, but it steadied her. At least he did not lie. Carolyn pressed her lips together, trying to stop the tremble in them. Everyone will see it. No, Leo said. She opened her eyes. You can't stop the internet. I can slow it down. His voice remained quiet. I can remove the main feed. I can pressure the platforms. I can find every paid camera crew, every contracted editor, every person who signed an agreement tonight, and make them understand the cost of using your face. Carolyn stared at him. Why would you do that for me? For the first time, Leo looked away from the window and fully at her. In the dim light of the car, his expression seemed carved from shadow and control. Because I watched a room full of people enjoy cruelty and call it charity. Because your sister used your trust as a weapon. Because no one in that room had the courage to stand up until I did. Carolyn let out a hollow breath. That doesn't answer why me. Leo was silent for a moment. Then he said, because you looked at her like you still loved her, even while she was destroying you. Those words broke something quiet inside Carolyn. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough that a tear slipped down her cheek before she could stop it. She turned toward the window, embarrassed, but Leo simply reached into the side compartment and handed her a folded white handkerchief. It was old-fashioned, soft, and perfectly clean. She took it with shaking fingers. Thank you. The car took them not to a mansion or a nightclub or some hidden criminal palace, but to the top floor of a private hotel overlooking the river. The lobby was almost empty when they entered through a side entrance. No photographers, no whispering strangers. Just marble floors, low lights, and a silence that felt almost unreal after the noise of the gala. Leo's men stayed far enough back to give her space, but close enough to remind her that the world around Leonardo Moretti was never truly unguarded. He brought her to a private suite with tall windows and a view of the city glittering below. A fire burned low in a stone fireplace. Someone had already placed tea, water, and a covered tray of food on a small table. Carolyn stood just inside the doorway, unsure what to do with her body, unsure whether to sit, stand, cry, or disappear. Leo removed his coat and draped it over the back of a chair. You are safe here tonight. Carolyn looked around. I should go home, you can. But there may be people outside your apartment by morning. Reporters. Strangers. Your sister's followers. Men who think pain is entertainment. The thought made her stomach twist. She had not even considered that. Her apartment was small, ordinary, and suddenly not private anymore. She imagined people finding her building, her mailbox, her car. She imagined comments, messages, screenshots, strangers turning her humiliation into jokes. Leo watched the realization settle over her. Stay here tonight. Tomorrow, you decide what you want. Carolyn sat slowly on the edge of the sofa. Her legs felt weak. I don't know what I want. That is all right. Leo moved to the table and poured her tea. Tonight, you only need to know what you do not want. She looked at him. His eyes were steady. You do not want to be used again. Carolyn took the cup from him, her hands wrapping around the warmth. For a long while, neither of them spoke. The fire made soft sounds. Far below, traffic crossed the river in quiet streams of red and white light. It should have felt strange sitting in a hotel suite with a man half the city feared, but somehow the silence did not feel dangerous. It felt protected. After a while, Leo's phone buzzed. He glanced at it and something cold moved through his face. What? Carolyn asked. He did not answer at once. Then he turned the phone so she could see. It was a message from Matteo. Cleo's team was already trying to spin the event. The official statement said Carolyn had participated willingly in a social experiment about confidence and online perception. It thanked her for her bravery. It called the backlash unfortunate. Underneath, someone had attached a screenshot of Cleo crying on camera, saying she never meant to hurt her sister. Carolyn stared at the image until the words blurred. She's lying, Carolyn whispered. Yes, she's making herself the victim. Yes, Carolyn set the tea down with more force than she meant to. A small wave spilled over the edge of the cup. She always does this. Leo's eyes lifted to hers. Carolyn stood and began pacing, the words coming faster now, not because she had planned them, but because a lifetime of swallowing them had finally become too heavy. When we were kids, if she broke something, I helped clean it up. If she forgot something, I covered for her. If she said something cruel, everyone told me she was just stressed or young or under pressure. She could cry on command. She could make people forgive her before they even understood what she had done. Carolyn laughed once, bitterly, and I kept thinking if I was good enough, useful enough, quiet enough, she would stop being ashamed of me. Leo said nothing. He let her speak. She built her whole brand on loving yourself, Carolyn said, looking at the city. And she never loved me for 1 second when it cost her anything. The silence after that felt different, not empty. Full. Leo walked to the long desk near the window and opened a black folder his men must have delivered while Carolyn was lost in thought. Your sister's brand is not as clean as it looks. Carolyn turned. What do you mean? He spread several documents across the desk. Bank transfers, sponsorship agreements, shell company names. Carolyn's eyes moved over them automatically, trained by years of ledgers and numbers. Even tired, even shaken, she saw the pattern faster than most people would have. Payments routed through consulting firms. Donations recorded twice. Expenses disguised as outreach. Influencer partnerships marked as charity disbursements. And there, near the bottom of one page, was Preston Vale's name attached to a private loan. Carolyn stepped closer. Where did you get this? Leo gave her a look that said the question had many answers, none of them polite. She picked up one page, her accountant's mind cutting through grief like a blade through thread. This is wrong. These sponsorship payments were reported as donations, but they were paid back out through another company. This company here, Vale Strategic Media, is Preston's. Cleo's charity paid her fiancé's company with donor money. Leo nodded. Keep reading. Carolyn did. The more she saw, the colder her hands became. Cleo's beauty brand had claimed partnerships with major wellness sponsors, but some of those sponsors had not paid anything. The numbers were inflated. The charity's public donations were being used to support Cleo's lifestyle. Dresses, travel, apartment leases, private events, and Preston, polished Preston with his perfect smile, owed a massive amount of money to a lender connected to the Moretti network. Carolyn looked up slowly. Preston owes you money. Not directly, Leo said. But close enough. How much? Enough that he has been desperate for months. Carolyn understood then. The gala, the live stream, the viral stunt. Cleo did not just want attention, she needed it. She needed followers, sponsors, donors, pity, outrage, anything that could turn into money before Preston's debts swallowed her life. Carolyn sank into the chair at the desk. She used me to save herself. Leo's voice was low. Yes, the word should have crushed her, but it did not. It hurt deeply, but beneath the hurt something else began to rise, a clean, quiet anger, not the kind that made her shake, the kind that made her think. She pulled the documents closer. These files are messy. Whoever built this structure thought no one would look past the public reports. Can you prove it? Carolyn looked at the bank transfers. Her tears were gone now. Her Leo noticed. So did she. Yes, she said. But not from these alone. I need her original charity reports, live stream contracts, sponsor invoices, and access to the donor platform records. Leo almost smiled. You will have them. Carolyn looked at him sharply. I'm not asking you to hurt anyone, I know. I mean it. I don't want people dragged into alleys or threatened. Leo leaned one hand on the desk, his gaze steady on hers. Then we will do this your way. The word surprised her. My way? You are the accountant. His voice carried the faintest edge of respect, and it warmed something inside her that Cleo's praise never had. Numbers are your battlefield. I will only open the doors. Carolyn held his gaze. For the first time that night, she did not feel like a woman being rescued. She felt like a woman being handed the tools to rescue herself. By sunrise, Carolyn had not slept. Leo's team had delivered files, laptops, contracts, and private reports. Matteo had found the deleted livestream backups. Another man had recovered emails between Cleo, Preston, Julian, and the production company. The plan had been written plainly in those messages, softened by business language but ugly underneath. Julian's payment, Cleo's talking points, the moment where he would reject Carolyn, the planned camera angles, the clips already prepared for posting. Carolyn read every word. Each one hurt less than she expected. Maybe because the first wound was always the deepest. After that, truth became almost calming. Leo stayed nearby through most of the night, taking calls in a low voice, never hovering but never leaving. Sometimes Carolyn felt his eyes on her, not hungry, not pitying, but watchful, as if he was learning her. As if the way she worked fascinated him. By the next afternoon, Cleo had announced a second event. A smaller emergency livestream gala, framed as a public conversation about accountability, forgiveness, and the dangers of online misunderstanding. It was a clever move. Cleo would cry, apologize without admitting guilt, invite Carolyn to forgive her, and turn the whole thing into another performance. Her followers were already divided. Some called her cruel. Others praised her for starting a difficult discussion. Sponsors were nervous but not gone. Carolyn watched the announcement on Leo's tablet, her face calm. "She wants me there," she said. Leo stood behind her, his hands in his pockets. "Yes, she thinks if I don't show up, she can say I refused healing. If I do, she thinks she can make me forgive her on camera." "Yes." Carolyn turned off the tablet. "Then I'll go." Leo's jaw tightened. "It may be ugly." Carolyn looked down at her hands. They were steady. It already was. That evening, Carolyn stood in front of a full-length mirror in the hotel suite while a stylist Leo had sent adjusted the sleeve of her dress. The dress was deep emerald green, soft but structured, fitted in a way that did not hide her body. It followed the curve of her waist, the fullness of her hips, the weight of her arms, not as apology but as fact. Carolyn almost asked for a shawl, almost asked if there was something looser. Then she looked at herself again and stopped. She was still fat, still soft, still the woman people had laughed at the night before, but she was not small. When Leo entered, the stylist stepped away. He stopped near the door and looked at her with an intensity that made the room feel warmer. Carolyn felt her old instinct rise. She almost said, "Is it too much?" Instead, she lifted her chin. "Will this work?" Leo's gaze moved over her face, then settled on her eyes. "They will not know where to look first." She smiled despite herself. "That sounds dangerous." "It is." The second gala was held in a smaller studio space Cleo used for brand launches. It had white walls, soft lights, and a carefully arranged stage with 2 chairs meant to look intimate and honest. Cameras were already rolling when Carolyn arrived with Leonardo Moretti at her side. The room changed the moment they entered. Cleo's smile froze, Preston's face tightened. Julian, standing near the back as if he had only been a minor part of the first event, went pale. Carolyn heard whispers ripple through the room. She did not lower her eyes. Cleo recovered first, because Cleo always recovered fast. She hurried forward in a pale pink suit, tears already shining. "Carolyn," she said, reaching for her hands. "Thank God you came." Carolyn stepped back before Cleo could touch her. The movement was small, but every camera caught it. Cleo's eyes flashed with panic, then softened for the audience. "I deserve that." "No," Carolyn said quietly. "You deserve the truth." The room went still. Cleo laughed gently, the way she did when trying to make someone else look unstable. "That's why we're here, to tell the truth. To heal." Carolyn looked toward the cameras. She could feel millions watching again, but this time, the light did not feel like a weapon pointed at her. It felt like a door. She walked past Cleo and stepped onto the stage. She did not sit in the chair arranged for her. Instead, she stood. Leo remained near the edge of the room, silent, his presence dark and steady. He did not need to speak. His stillness made sure no one interrupted before Carolyn was ready. Carolyn looked at her sister. "Last night," she said, her voice clear though her heart was beating hard, "my sister invited me to what she called a body positivity charity dinner. She told me I belonged there. She told me she wanted to honor me, but the event was planned as a trap." Cleo's smile shook. "Carolyn, we talked about this. It was never meant to be a trap." Carolyn lifted one hand, and Matteo connected the first file to the large screen behind her. An email appeared. Cleo's face went white. Carolyn did not look away from the audience. "This is an email from Cleo to her production team, sent 6 days before the dinner. In it she says, 'Carolyn has always wanted to feel chosen. Julian will make her believe it.' Then we reveal the message." A gasp moved through the room. Cleo turned toward Preston. Preston looked away. Carolyn continued. Here is the payment contract for Julian Cross. Here is the planned rejection. Here are the camera notes. Close up on Carolyn's face. Capture silence after rejection. Wait for emotional reaction before Cleo steps in. Julian backed toward the exit, but one of Leo's men quietly blocked the door. Not with a weapon, not with a threat, just with presence. Julian stopped moving. Cleo's eyes filled with real tears now. Carolyn, please. Carolyn looked at her. No. You already had your turn. The next files appeared. Donor reports, sponsorship invoices, bank transfers. Carolyn explained them in simple words, calmly enough that everyone could understand. Cleo's charity had reported donations that were never fully given. Money meant for outreach had been paid into Preston's company. Fake sponsorships had been used to increase Cleo's value to brands. The Body Positive Foundation that asked women to love themselves had been quietly using their trust to fund luxury trips, designer clothes, and Preston's debt. Preston stood abruptly. This is illegal. You can't show private records. Leo finally moved. Just one step. Sit down. Preston sat. Carolyn looked at him with a coldness she had not known she owned. You borrowed money you couldn't repay. Cleo needed a viral moment to keep sponsors from leaving. So the two of you chose me. Preston said nothing. Cleo's face crumpled. I was under pressure. You don't understand what it's like to have everyone watching you. Carolyn laughed softly, and the sound carried through the studio. Everyone watched me last night, Cleo. Because you made them. The truth of that sentence filled the room. For once, Cleo had no beautiful answer ready. Carolyn turned back to the cameras. I am not here because I want revenge. I am here because women like my sister build platforms using words like love, healing, confidence, and sisterhood, while privately deciding who is worthy of dignity. I am here because cruelty does not become activism when you put a charity logo on it. And I am here because I spent too many years believing my body made me easy to shame. Her voice softened then, but it did not weaken. I was ashamed last night. I was hurt. I was humiliated. But I was not the person who should have been embarrassed. The studio was silent. Cleo covered her mouth as comments exploded across the livestream screen. Sponsors began withdrawing publicly in real time. Viewers demanded refunds. Former employees started posting their own stories. Julian's name became attached to the paid stunt. Preston's lenders, donors, and partners began calling before Carolyn even finished speaking. Cleo stepped toward her, no longer performing. Carolyn, please. I'm your sister. Carolyn looked at her for a long moment. She saw the girl who once held her hand during thunderstorms. She saw the woman who had turned her into content. Both were real. That was the painful part. I know, Carolyn said. That's why you should have protected me. Cleo broke then. Not beautifully, not for the camera, but with the ugly fear of a person watching the life she built on lies begin to fall apart. Preston left first, pushing through the side door without looking back at her. Julian was escorted out to speak with attorneys. The production team shut down the cameras too late. The damage was already done. Cleo's empire had been built on attention, and now attention had turned against her like a tide. Carolyn walked off the stage slowly. Her legs felt weak, but not from shame. From release, Leo met her near the edge of the room. You did not need me. Carolyn looked up at him. I needed someone to open the doors. His eyes warmed, just slightly. The doors are yours now. In the weeks that followed, Cleo's world collapsed with astonishing speed. Sponsors cut ties. Donors demanded investigations. Her foundation was frozen. Preston disappeared from her life the moment her money stopped protecting him, leaving behind debts, lawsuits, and a ring she could no longer afford to insure. The same followers who had once praised her honesty now replayed every old video, searching for the cruelty beneath the smile. Cleo tried to apologize, then defend herself, then disappear. None of it restored what she had lost. Carolyn did not celebrate. Not loudly, not cruelly. She returned to work, but not to the same life. Leo helped her create an independent financial oversight firm for charities and influencer-led foundations. It was Carolyn's idea, Carolyn's structure, Carolyn's name on the door. She built it for the people who donated with hope, and for the people used as props by those who knew how to cry under good lighting. The first time she appeared publicly after the scandal, She wore a cream-colored suit tailored perfectly to her body. Her hands shook before she stepped onto the stage, but only for a moment. Then she remembered the room where they laughed. She remembered Leo asking if she was all right. She remembered her own voice saying no. And she realized that one honest no had changed everything. Leo stood at the back of that room, as he often did, half in shadow, watching with the quiet pride of a dangerous man who had found something he could not buy, force or command. Carolyn was not his possession, not his project, not his rescued victim. She was the woman who had walked through shame and come out carrying proof. After speech, he waited for her near the private exit. "You were magnificent," he said. Carolyn smiled. This time she did not look away. "I know." Something like amusement touched his mouth. "Good." Outside, the city moved around them, bright and restless. Carolyn looked at the skyline, remembering how small she had felt the night Cleo's invitation arrived. How carefully she had chosen her dress. How badly she had wanted to be accepted by someone who had never deserved that power over her. Leo offered his arm again, just as he had on the first night. This time, Carolyn took it without trembling. Somewhere behind them, Cleo Abernathy's name was still falling through headlines, lawsuits, and broken brand deals. But Carolyn no longer lived inside her sister's shadow. She had stepped beyond it, into a life made from her own intelligence, her own courage, and her own refusal to shrink. The woman they had mocked for being too much had become exactly that. Too smart to fool, too strong to break, too visible to erase. And as she walked beside Leonardo Moretti beneath the city lights, every person who saw them understood the same quiet truth. Carolyn Abernathy was no longer the sister hidden in the background. She was the woman no one dared to humiliate again.